For those of you guys who don't know me, my name is Sarmad, and in today's video I'm going to be talking about my A-levels. So the first time I sat my A-levels was in the summer of 2019, where I got a B in biology, a C in chemistry and a D in maths. With those grades, I didn't get into my firm or insurance choices at universities, so I had to either apply to university through clearing or retake the year. So that's what I decided to do. I applied as a retake student for the following year, which was in May 2020. I was supposed to sit my exams in May 2020, but then obviously coronavirus and the pandemic happened and the exams had got cancelled. Now for like 3-4 months there was a lot of speculation about what they were going to do, whether they were going to give private candidates a calculated grade or not. They ended up making a decision that they weren't going to give us a calculated grade, so essentially what they did is they postponed my exams to October 2020. So to actually get to university now, I had to take another gap year, so that's exactly where I am right now. I'm on a second gap year. But nevertheless, I did sit my exams in October 2020 and I came out with A stars in both my subjects. So I didn't actually resit biology because I already had a B from 2019. So I thought the B was sufficient. I would just resit chemistry and maths. And I obviously did that and I got A stars. Now, ever since I've got my results and I've shared my results with my friends and my family and, you know, even on social media, I've had a lot of messages and a lot of questions from people about how I actually made such an improvement with my grades. Now, obviously going from a D to an A star in maths and a C to an A star in chemistry is a very, very big deal. I think on average, like when people retake the exams, they usually just improve by 1 grade in their subject, but I obviously exceeded that and made such big jumps. That's the thing that's shocked a lot of people. So, like I said, I've had a lot of questions from a lot of people. Sadly, I haven't been able to kind of, give them advice about revising the stuff in the depth that I wanted to give it. So basically I thought, why not make a YouTube video? And I've summarized everything, like the main things that I applied to my revision this year and the main things that I changed this year compared to when I sat my A-levels for the first time. This video is going to serve as a guide for anyone who's sitting their A-levels. I'm hoping that a lot of people don't find themselves in the same situation as me, because honestly, failing your A-levels is a horrible feeling, and I wouldn't want anyone else to be in that situation. So hopefully people can kind of learn from my mistakes and try to avoid failing their A-levels themselves. So the first tip or the first piece of advice I would give is to find a suitable place to revise. Now, when I first sat my A-levels, I was kind of all over the place. So I was revising at study centres or public libraries. The key thing I'm trying to get at here is that I didn't have one dedicated suitable place to revise. I already had so many distractions when it came to my revision. By not sitting down in one place and focusing on my revision, I was kind of adding to those distractions. So to avoid that, my personal preference and what I would recommend is just to sit at home, get a desk like the one I have. The more I sat there and the more I just pushed myself to sit there and revise, the more I kind of got used to it. And it got to a point where I was so comfortable with sitting at my desk and revising, to a point where now I wouldn't actually revise anywhere else. Tip number 2 is use of a specification. So when you first come from GCSEs to A-levels, specification is something that's relatively new to all students because you don't really look at it in GCSE, and that was kind of the same thing with me. I didn't make use of the specification throughout my whole time at sixth form, and I think that was basically my downfall. I didn't really know a lot about my course, and the specification literally contains every piece of information about everything that's going to come up in your exams. So if you haven't already, download the specification from your exam board website. I'm going to talk a bit later about how I incorporated the specification into my revision. It's literally just a checklist of everything that comes up in your exam. Now, a lot of the time when I was revising, although I was using exercise books that was made for my specification or my exam board, they still did contain excess information which just wasn't necessary and I didn't need to go over. So the specification kind of helped me filter that out. I would just use it as a checklist, and if there was anything in the exercise book that wasn't on the specification, I just wouldn't read it. And it never came up. So tip number 3 is all about planning your revision. When I actually did sit my A-levels for the first time, I did actually make a revision plan, but the key thing when it comes to planning is making an effective revision plan. The first time I planned, I just made a very complex revision timetable and I wrote down what I'm going to do every single day for like 2 months, and quite obviously I didn't stick to it. So the second time I sat my A-levels, I instead decided to use long-term and short-term goals. So I'll talk a bit about what that is. Now I'll start with the long-term goals. Your long-term goals are where you want to be with your revision in, for example, 1 month's time or 2 months time. So for me, for example, it may be in 1 month's time or in 2 months time, I wanted to have complete a certain module. Maybe I wanted to have completed all the content in biology or a certain module in chemistry. So what I would do is I would make a note of where I wanted to be in that period of time, and I would also make a mental note of how much work I needed to get there. So if I wanted to complete 30 chapters of biology in a month, that equates to 1 chapter a day. So I'd make a note that, okay, I need to do 1 chapter a day. And then it comes on to my short-term goals. Now, your short-term goals is not kind of a comprehensive plan of what you're going to do every single day for that month. Instead, what I did is I sat down 10 minutes at the end of each day and I would just make a short plan on what I wanted to do the next day. I would literally write, okay, revise 3 hours chemistry, maybe have an hour break, and do 4 hours of math. But the main thing about short-term goals was that I always put down the minimum amount of work for the next day. So if you think back to the long-term goals, I said that in order to achieve 30 chapters at the end of the month, I needed to do 1 chapter a day. So when I was doing my short-term goals, I would only ever put 1 chapter for the next day. Now the benefit of this is that I would usually find myself doing that 1 chapter and having maybe 2 or 3 hours left and then doing more chapters than I needed to do. So in that sense, I was always ahead of my timetable, and I always finished the day sort of feeling more motivated and over accomplished, rather than, you know, setting myself too much work the next day and then just feeling so demotivated because I didn't even reach my target. So definitely put the minimum amount of work, and hopefully in every situation you will always end up exceeding that. This also depends on how long you have left till your exams, but you just want to make it realistic. Don't lie to yourselves and say you're going to do X amount of work if you know you can't commit to it. Now my 4th tip is revision techniques. The first time I sat my A-levels, I knew nothing about revising at all. I knew nothing about making notes. I kind of spent the entirety of my next year figuring out what revision techniques work for me, and there was some that I liked, ones that I still kind of use today, and there was some revision techniques that I didn't find as useful. So if I go through a kind of typical day of my revision, for example, if I was revising a subject like biology, and this is a process that I'd repeat with all of my A-levels. So what I would do is, first of all, I've had my specification open and I'd have the exercise book open to the topic that I wanted to study. First, I'd have a read of the specification and just make sure that I had a brief idea of everything that was supposed to come up in this section of the exercise book, and then I would literally have a read of the exercise book, a thorough read of the exercise book, just making sure I understood everything. If there was a part that I didn't understand, I'd probably explain it to myself, so sit and have a conversation with myself and kind of help myself understand it. As soon as that was done, I'd close the book and I'd use a mind map. Now, like I said, I was quite a lazy student, so I didn't really like the idea of making notes. However, I found mind maps to be the perfect compromise for me, so I could basically still make notes and still have that level of detail, but at the same time it wasn't as time consuming as, you know, copying out textbooks, which I don't even think is that beneficial anyway. So making mind maps with the book flows is an example of active recall, which studies show is actually one of the most efficient methods of revision. What you're doing is you're basically recalling the information that you've just read, and that's the same kind of situation you'd be in an exam. I would sit down, make my mind map, and then as soon as I'd finish with my mind map, I'd open up the textbook, read through the textbook, and if there's any parts or pieces of information that I'd missed out, I'd go and complete my mind map. As soon as I was done with that, I'd spend maybe 10 to 20 minutes going online, searching questions and having a go at some questions specific to that subject, only just so I had a brief idea of what kind of questions are going to be asked when it comes to that topic. And I would literally just repeat that process, like, you know, however many times a day. If I wanted to finish a module, maybe I'd make 4 or 5 mind maps depending on how many topics come up, and I would literally repeat that day in, day out. And for me, that was the best thing, and that was the thing that was working. Again, I had my specification alongside just to make sure that everything I was revising was relevant to my course. There is also a lot of other techniques that people use. For me, I think this kind of layout and process was the best. In terms of, you know, the duration of my revision, I usually opted for doing like 2-3 hours solid and then taking like an hour break. I know a lot of people do kind of have different layouts when it comes to revision. For example, I know that there's a very popular kind of trend of revision, which is, I think it's called like the Pomodoro timer or tomato timer, and that's doing like 25 minutes of revision and then having a 5-minute break. Now for me, I did actually try that out. It didn't really work. I think when it comes to revising, starting your revision is definitely the most hardest part. So why would you want to reset that timer every 25 minutes? And a lot of the time I found myself working towards a break. So I was more excited about the break than actually, you know, like finishing the topic, for example, or finishing the module. And I think that kind of gave me the wrong idea about revision. I felt like I was just rewarding myself with a 5-minute break and I hadn't really done anything yet. So instead I opted for just doing, you know, a solid 2-3 hours of revision. Even if it took me half an hour to get into the flow and, you know, actually start doing work, I still would work after that for maybe like 2-3 hours solid. So that obviously worked best for me, but, you know, have a go. If you think the Pomodoro effect is going to be useful for you, then definitely I would recommend it. I know it works for a lot of people. For me, it was just about getting in as many hours as I can. I would also reward myself with, you know, a sufficient enough break. That actually brings me on to my 5th point, which is past papers. It's kind of stressed all the time. As soon as you start college, you're told constantly, you make sure you're doing past papers. So without a doubt, past papers are key to your revision. However, I think the most important thing about past papers is how you actually choose to use them. When I first did my A-levels, when I used to do past papers, if I did any past papers, I would usually just do a paper, mark it and put it to a side. When it came to me resitting my exams, doing some sort of research online, I found that a lot of people were saying that we should go through mark schemes. So that's exactly what I did. I started to study the mark scheme. So what I would do is I would spend maybe half an hour to an hour after every single paper that I've done, and I'd go through every question that I'd got right and every question that I'd got wrong. So every question that I got wrong, obviously you want to go through and make sure you understand why you got the question wrong. What I'd also do is I'd put these questions in a separate folder, and every Sunday, the end of every week, I'd attempt the questions again just to make sure that there wasn't any gaps in my knowledge. So the questions I got right, I would also go over, and that's because with every question, with every mark scheme, even though, for example, you might have a 4-mark question which has 4 points that are going to give you 1 mark each, mark schemes would often give you a lot more points that you could have written down. And for me, that was an opportunity to expand my knowledge and understand what other ways I could have got marks in, because you never know what kind of question you're going to get in the exam. I definitely found a benefit in going through the entire mark scheme, whether I got a question right or wrong. I think this is the thing that kind of took me from that A to A-star student. If you are aiming for the top marks, definitely study through your mark schemes and make good use of your past papers. I would advise, however, you only do past papers once you have completed your revision. Studying mark schemes is not something that's essential, especially if you're kind of cramming your revision. But if you do have that time, if you have spaced out your revision enough, then definitely try to incorporate that into your revision plan. Now, the 6th point I'm going to talk about is distractions. Probably one of the hardest things about revision is the distractions we have around us. For most people, I think their phone is the biggest distraction, but there's always ways around this. I think the key thing when it comes to distraction is managing your distractions and not completely restricting yourself. When it comes to phone use, if I was revising, I would keep my phone out of sight and I wouldn't use it whilst I was revising. However, I'd always make time for myself throughout the day to maybe check my phone and keep myself updated, because I knew that if I didn't, it would only make me want to use my phone more. What worked best for me was kind of just putting my phone out of sight, maybe putting it in a drawer just so I couldn't see it. And that way, without seeing my phone, it wouldn't remind me of my phone and I would just focus on my revision. I know there's a lot of other ways that you can kind of go about this. So you can, for example, give your phone to a family member or something just to keep for you whilst you do your revision. Some people prefer to use apps. I think there's one called Forest that I heard a lot of people talk about, and it kind of grows a tree for the duration of your revision, so it kind of stops you from using any other apps. So if you think that is going to be beneficial for you, definitely do that. But the key thing here is to manage your distractions. Don't completely restrict yourself from using your phone, and in the same way, don't restrict yourself from other things that you might do. If you think that you need a break and you think you need to go out, definitely make time for yourself and incorporate that into your revision plan, because you need some sort of relief from your stress. So definitely find time for yourself. The key thing here is to manage your distractions, just not restricting yourself. The 7th and final thing that I'm going to talk about today is mindset. Now, I think the main thing that I kind of saw that was different whilst I was at sixth form and whilst I resat my exam was my mindset and my attitude towards revision. Coming from GCSEs, not really revising and getting, very, very good grades, I kind of had a very naive perspective of A-levels. I kind of thought, I can just waffle my way through it and get good grades, and obviously that wasn't the case, and it definitely humbled me. I knew I had to do a lot of work, and I knew I had the potential to do it. It was just about sitting down and starting. If I'm being honest, me sitting here and telling you, go and have a try of this and use this revision technique is not going to be beneficial if you actually don't go and see if it works for yourself. It's one thing hearing about it and listening to its benefits, but if you don't actually try to see those benefits for yourself and actually try it out yourself, you're never going to know what works for you. Like I said, me resitting was kind of a journey and I was kind of understanding more about revision, more about what works for me. And I got to a point where I was so comfortable with revision where I would wake up and I know I'd get 6-7 hours a day because I knew exactly what works for me. And revision doesn't really get much more complicated than that. As soon as you find something that works for you and you get into your flow, I promise you it's going to get much easier. So if you're struggling with finding useful tips, literally what you're doing now, have a look at videos, use different resources, try to get advice from people like myself who have sat their A-levels and made these improvements or have got good grades, and try to yourself get a feel for what they've done. Definitely incorporate some of these things I've talked about today into your revision, and obviously I think you will kind of see the same benefits that I did. So that is my 7 key pieces of advice for anyone who's either sitting their A-levels or who's about to start their A-levels. For me, those things worked best. I know that they're the main things that help me achieve that grade. There are a lot of other things I obviously want to talk about. I am hoping to make more videos on, for example, how I revise for certain subjects like chemistry, like biology, like maths, because every subject is different and sometimes you need to have a different approach. And I also do want to mention, the use of an iPad in my revision, because I think that kind of revolutionized my entire revision process. It made everything so much easier for me and so much more organized. Hopefully in the future I will be making a video on that. But that's all for today. So if you found that video useful, please do like and subscribe. If there's any questions that you have about anything, my resit process, my gap year, anything at all, just leave a comment and obviously I'll respond. So yeah, thank you for watching.